They say the forest hides what the world forgets, but sometimes it remembers more than we do. A wounded tiger vanished into the trees one cold autumn morning, but after that, the woods fell strangely silent. Animals stopped running from the ranger who saved her. A little girl who hadn't spoken since her mother died whispered a single word: "Tiger." And from that day on, something started watching them from the shadows. Not to hurt them, but to heal them. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Autumn in the Great Smoky Mountains didn't just paint the trees, it carved poetry into the wind. Crisp October air swept through the ancient oaks and sugar maples like a hymn, rattling the crimson leaves into flurries of sound. The early morning light filtered through mist that clung low to the forest floor, casting a golden veil over the hills of Sevier County, Tennessee. Everything in the park still carried the hush of dawn, except the steady hum of tires rolling over dirt as Cole Dawson drove the narrow trail through Laurel Creek. Cole, 32, was a man of broad shoulders and quiet steps, with sun-touched skin and ash-blonde hair perpetually tousled by wind or worry. His Green Ranger uniform, though neatly pressed, bore subtle signs of wear: threadbare elbows, sun-faded collar, boots scuffed from miles walked. Cole had once been a military vet tech overseas, skilled with scalpels and pressure bandages, with scars on his arms to prove it. After the war, he returned not to hospitals but to trees, swapping sirens for birdsong. Yet, beneath his calm demeanor and gentle voice lived a constant vigilance, a need to protect not just people, but the voiceless things in the woods. He adjusted the gear shift of his off-road Jeep and exhaled, scanning the forest edge as he always did. He wasn't just checking for signs of poachers or injured animals. He was watching for the rhythm of the land itself. That rhythm had felt off lately. Tracks disturbed where they shouldn't be. Branches broken low, not by deer but by something heavier. And now, there was the matter of the blood. A sharp color caught his eye as he rounded the bend near Spruce Hollow. He stopped the Jeep and stepped out, boots crunching through a carpet of maple leaves. At first, it seemed like an illusion, a splash of red blending with the rust-colored earth. But then he crouched and saw it clearly, a smear of blood, not yet dried, clinging to flattened grass. Cole's breath caught. He knelt closer, fingers brushing the darkened soil. Then he noticed the tracks, deep paw prints, heavy and clawed, too large for a bobcat, wrong shape for a black bear, tiger. His pulse quickened. There were only whispers of such creatures in the region, usually attributed to abandoned exotics or escaped captives. Nothing confirmed. He followed the trail quietly, every sense alert. Birds had gone silent. A fresh streak of blood painted a fern, then another, then a small patch of orange fur clinging to a jagged branch. And there she was, a tigress, collapsed between two mossy boulders. Her breathing was shallow. Her once glorious coat was dulled by dust, tangled with burrs and flecked with blood. One of her front legs was twisted unnaturally, caught in a rusted steel trap that had been half buried beneath a camouflaged mat of pine needles. The trap's jaws had dug deep into her flesh, exposing sinew, blackening the skin at the edges. Her eyes, one still sharp, the other half-lidded, locked onto Cole with a mix of pain and disbelief. Cole froze, then slowly crouched and opened his med pack. "Easy, girl. I'm here to help," he whispered, his voice a balm against the cold. The tigress didn't move, but a low groan vibrated in her throat, more tired than threatening. Cole pulled out a tranquilizer injector. He hated using it without a full dose calculation, but the sedative was mild, just enough to reduce pain and panic. He administered the shot carefully, then set to work. The trap was old but vicious. He braced it with one boot and used his pliers to unlock its rusty grip, each movement deliberate and trembling. The metal finally gave way with a hollow snap. Her leg slumped to the ground. Blood welled fast. Cole worked faster, saline rinse, antiseptic spray, gauze. He pressed the bandage tight, wrapping it with vet wrap from hoof to shoulder. The tigress twitched but didn't resist. When it was done, Cole sat back on his heels. Her eyes had softened, pupils wide and glazed but focused. He exhaled in awe. "You're Ember," he said softly, as if the name had been waiting in the leaves, "because your eyes still burn. Even now, 50 miles away, in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Pigeon Forge, a small girl sat cross-legged on a carpet strewn with crayons and silence. Ivy Dawson was 10 years old, slim and pale, with chestnut hair that hung in uneven lengths from her refusal to let anyone brush it. Her clothes were loose, hand-me-downs from a cousin who had outgrown them. Her voice, however, had not returned since the night her mother died in a car crash 2 years earlier. The silence wasn't just grief. It was a barrier. Ivy hadn't spoken a word since the funeral. Therapists said it was selective mutism rooted in trauma. Teachers sent home concerned notes. But Cole, her father, understood something deeper. Ivy didn't fear people. She feared being seen by them. She now sat by the living room window, surrounded by her drawings. Hundreds of animals in all shapes and colors, wolves, deer, raccoons. But that afternoon, for the first time, Ivy drew something different. A tiger. Its body was imperfect, its stripes uneven, but its eyes, 2 dark embers, were fierce and full of something she didn't have a name for. Hope. She pinned the drawing beside her bed and crawled under the blanket, curling toward the glow of a nightlight. That evening, Cole came home tired but lighter somehow. He didn't speak much about what happened. He just placed his muddy boots by the door, ruffled Ivy's hair, and sat beside her with a quiet smile. He didn't notice the tiger pinned to her wall. Not yet. The fog still clung to the low valleys of the great Smoky Mountains, draping the forest in a veil of quiet mystery. Dawn broke slowly over Sevier County, Tennessee, filtering through bare maple branches in thin, pale strands. The wind had a colder bite now, and the air smelled of pine and distant snow. Autumn was fading, leaving behind its golden hush. Cole Dawson stood at the edge of an old logging trail, boots crunching over a scatter of dry, frost-kissed leaves. He adjusted the strap of his field bag and looked out into the trees. He should have felt alone. There was no sound but the wind and the occasional bird call, but ever since the morning he freed Ember, something had shifted. He could feel her, not with his eyes but in the quiet, wherever he walked. The animals seemed to still around him. Deer lifted their heads but didn't flee. Birds fell silent, watching him from high branches. Even the ever-elusive bobcat had been spotted pausing near his path, just long enough to be noticed. The forest felt alive in a new way, not hostile, not afraid, just watchful. Ember had vanished into the trees after he'd treated her wound. She hadn't left a trail. But Cole felt her presence like a second heartbeat in the woods. And sometimes, in the early fog, he thought he saw the flash of orange fur just beyond the next bend. She was near, not in body perhaps, but in spirit, in silence, in the very hush of the forest, at home. Ivy had begun changing too. She was still quiet, still moving like a shadow in their house. But the drawings had multiplied. Tigers in trees, tigers in the clouds, tigers walking beside tall men with sad eyes. Cole didn't ask what they meant. He only watched, waited, and hoped. One morning, Ivy appeared beside him by the front door, dressed in her favorite navy jacket. A hand-knit scarf looped twice around her neck. She held her sketchbook tight to her chest. Boots slightly too big for her feet. Her eyes met his, and without a word. She nodded once. It was the first time she had asked to join him. They walked together down the forest trail in silence. Cole kept his steps slow. Ivy trailed a little behind, sometimes pausing to press her fingers to the bark of a tree or crouch to study an old footprint. He didn't rush her. Halfway through the loop near Elk Hollow, she stopped. Cole turned back. "You all right, kiddo?" She looked up, her voice, hoarse with disuse, came like a whisper too fragile to catch. "Tiger." It was the first word she had spoken in over a year. Cole blinked, the sound landing in his chest like thunder. He didn't respond right away. He only stepped closer and gently squeezed her hand. Ivy didn't pull away. Later that week, Ivy accompanied him again. They didn't speak. She walked more confidently now, stepping where he stepped, watching the trees with calm eyes. At the far edge of the forest, where trails faded into untamed brush, Cole saw her pause beside a thicket he'd never given much thought to. A thin trail led deeper than he usually went, too dense for tourists. Not on any park map, but Ivy pushed forward, gently parting branches until a clearing opened on the other side. There stood a small cabin, more like a shack, really, built from hand-hewn logs and patched with moss. A thin stream of smoke rose from its stone chimney. A man sat on the porch, legs crossed, carving a length of wood with a curved blade. He looked up. Marshall Blake was in his late 60s, though he moved like a man much younger. His face was weathered, deep-lined but kind, framed by long silver hair tied back in a leather cord. He wore a jacket made of stitched-together canvas and deer hide, and a necklace hung loosely over his chest. Beads and carvings shaped like forest creatures. With a tiger's face in the center, he said nothing at first, just watched Ivy with calm, dark eyes. "You're the one she watches," he said after a moment, his voice low and sure, directed at Cole. Cole blinked. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" The man smiled faintly. "Not yet, but the tiger does." Ivy stepped closer to the porch without hesitation. She looked at the carving in his hands, a tiger in mid-stride, and then back to the man. "Marshall Blake." He introduced, nodding slightly. "I live with the forest. It tells me things." He didn't say more that day, but Ivy returned. Again and again. She sat near him on the porch as he carved or brewed tea over an old iron kettle. Sometimes she drew, sometimes she just listened. And Marshall told her stories, not fairy tales, but the stories of the land, of the great spirit that breathed life into every tree, of the invisible threads that tied animal spirits to human hearts. He spoke of tiger spirits, not native to these mountains, but not unwelcome, spirits of protection, of fire, of watching silently, fiercely, until the time to act came. "Some say they come when a child is lost," he told her once, tapping her chest gently, not lost in the woods, lost in here. Ivy didn't speak, but she drew that night, a tiger curled around a small girl beneath a canopy of stars. Marshall taught her how to listen, not with ears, but with stillness. "Stillness is how the forest speaks," he said. "The moment you stop trying to hear something, you'll hear everything." Cole didn't understand it all, But he saw Ivy changing, her shoulders less tense, her gaze steadier, her hand reaching for his without fear. And always, out in the forest, those silent steps, the tiger hadn't returned, but the world around Cole had quieted in reverence, and somewhere out in that silence, Ember watched. Rain lashed against the roof like wild branches dragged by the wind. The old ranger cabin near Black Hollow had withstood its fair share of storms, but tonight it groaned as if the forest itself had grown restless. The power had gone out hours ago, and the fire in the stone hearth crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the timber walls. A single lantern, its flame subdued and swaying, lit the room where Cole Dawson sat cross-legged beside his daughter. Ivy was curled under a thick wool blanket on the cabin's cot, her hands wrapped around a notebook. Her hair was tucked behind her ears now, something she hadn't allowed in months. The blanket rose and fell with her breathing. Steady. Quiet. She was writing. Slowly. Carefully. Cole didn't interrupt. He only listened to the storm and let the moment be. The cabin they were in was not their home, but one of the old supply shelters scattered across the forest, used when rangers had to stay deep in the woods overnight. It wasn't much. One room, one cot, a few crates of dried food, and a cast-iron stove. But tonight, it had become their sanctuary. The storm had rolled in quicker than the forecast predicted, turning a short patrol into an unplanned overnight. They had made it here just before the downpour began, soaked to the bone but safe. The radio had fizzled, and cell signals were long gone in these hills. Cole had managed to light the fire, find a few cans of soup, and turn the small space into something livable. But the forest outside had not quieted. It was the kind of night animals moved in desperation. Far off, through the sheets of rain, a distant howl pierced the dark. Cole stiffened. Ivy looked up from her writing. Her eyes, still wide, still easily startled, found her father's. Wolves, she asked. Voice barely more than breath. He nodded slowly, likely a small pack. Hungry. They'd kept a small cooler of provisions on the porch. Jerky, canned meat, some leftover stew. The scent could have traveled in this wind. Cole stood, checking the latch on the door, making sure the windows were barred. They weren't far from wolf territory. Normally, the animals avoided humans, but hunger made creatures braver, or more foolish. Another howl came, closer, lower. Cole grabbed the flashlight from the wall hook, tested its beam, then switched it off. Too bright. He returned to Ivy and knelt beside her. "It's all right," he said. "We're safe in here." She clutched the notebook to her chest. "They sound angry." He hesitated, then reached into his bag and pulled out the carving. Marshall's tiger pendant. Ivy's eyes lit up as he placed it into her hand. It was warm from being against his chest. She held it like a talisman. Marshall had carved it from red cedar, the tiger's stripes inked with soot. He'd presented it to Ivy the day before, with no ceremony, just a smile and a soft murmur. "To watch over you when you walk in fear." Ivy had said "thank you," loud enough for both men to hear. Cole rose again. Pacing near the front wall, outside, the wind screamed, then scratch. Something scraped along the porch. Ivy froze, another scratch, then a low growl. Cole turned off the lantern. The room fell into darkness, lit only by the dying embers of the fire. He stepped to the window and peeked through the slats. 4 shapes moved in the dark, low, lean, gliding just beyond the edge of the clearing. Wolves. Their coats were patchy, their ribs visible even in the faint light. A young one nosed the cooler, knocking it off the porch. The lid popped open, and the scent of food filled the air. the largest wolf. Gray, with a torn left ear, snapped at the smaller one, asserting dominance. They were hungry, desperate, and they were not leaving. A growl rumbled directly outside the door. Cole grabbed a metal rod from beside the stove. He didn't want to use it. But if one got in... Suddenly, the growling stopped, replaced by silence. Too sudden. Then came the roar. Not a bark, not a howl. A roar that split the storm. Low, guttural, ancient. Cole staggered back from the door. Ivy gasped and stood, clutching the tiger pendant. Was that? A crash, a yelp, then another snarl, but it wasn't from the wolves. Outside, chaos erupted. The unmistakable sound of bodies colliding, whines of retreat, paws scrambling over wet earth. Cole threw the door open. There, at the edge of the trees, stood a figure illuminated by a flash of lightning. Ember, her fur, darkened by rain, clung to her powerful frame. She stood over the cooler, her eyes burning with fury. Around her, the wolves scattered into the trees, whimpering, beaten. One limped, one didn't look back. She turned her head toward the cabin. Lightning flashed again, and for a moment, her gaze met Cole's. Then Ivy appeared beside him. "She's not just a tiger," Ivy whispered. "She's hope." Ember held the gaze for one heartbeat more, then vanished into the trees, her stripes swallowed by the storm. Cole pulled Ivy close, holding her with arms that shook. Inside, the fire crackled to life again, as if sparked by her words later that night. As the wind calmed and the rain softened to mist, Ivy picked up her notebook and wrote until she fell asleep. She titled the page, "The Silent Friend Who Roars." The last of winter's breath clung to the early mornings in the great Smoky Mountains, brushing frost across the underbrush and tracing thin silver veins along the edges of fallen leaves. The forest had grown still again, not in peace, but in pause. Cole Dawson could feel it the moment he stepped out from the ranger station near Miller's Creek. Birds were quiet. The deer had retreated deeper into the brush. Even the wind seemed to change direction as if wary. It had been 3 weeks since the night Ember saved them from the wolves. Since then, sightings had increased, not of the tiger herself, but of things left behind. Deep claw marks in trees far from hiking trails, paw prints in snow-blanketed meadows. Uneaten deer carcasses found cleanly laid near ranger paths. Cole hadn't seen Ember again, but she was there, leaving signs not just of survival, but of sentience. It was Marshal Blake who voiced the concern first. "They're here," the old Cherokee woodsman had said, his hand resting lightly on Ivy's shoulder as she scribbled in her notebook on the porch. Not her kind, ours. Men who walk with cages in their hearts and money in their eyes. Cole had known the signs. Branches broken at unnatural angles. Ash piles with cigarette butts in places no hikers should reach. Rust-colored threads from synthetic fabric snagged on bark. Someone was back. And they weren't here for beauty. They were here to take the poachers. He'd heard rumors about them last year, an international trafficking ring using national parks to trap and export exotic animals. Few believed tigers existed in these parts. That made Ember all the more valuable and more vulnerable. Cole reported what he could, but without concrete evidence. There wasn't much the Park Service could do. So he took to the forest alone, not with guns or sirens, but with careful eyes and a silent promise. It was on one of these patrols, at a rarely used trail near Flat Rock Bluff, that Cole found the first trap. It was cruel in its design, spiked, camouflaged, and baited with raw meat. He disarmed it, buried it, marked the area in his map, and kept going over the next week. He found 6 more, all placed with purpose, all baited to catch a predator large and precise. They were hunting Ember, and they were close, but Cole was not alone. He began leaving signs, stacked stones, twisted reeds, and broken pine cones placed in deliberate patterns. The kind Ember might recognize. He didn't know how much she understood, but the traps he found after that were always already disturbed, the bait gone. The mechanism snapped. It was a silent partnership, and in that silence, something else stirred. Ivy had begun to walk more freely now, no longer hiding behind her father when strangers passed. Her voice, though soft, had returned in full. She read aloud from her journal in the evenings, usually to Marshall, sometimes just to the fire. The cabin had become her second home, and the old man her quiet mentor. One morning, after Cole returned late from scouting, Marshall invited him to sit by the fire pit. The sun had barely risen, and Ivy was still inside drawing. "You know," Marshall began, stirring the embers, "your wife used to sit in that same spot." Cole turned to him slowly. "You knew Elise." Marshall nodded. "Before she was your Elise. Back when she was a student in environmental biology. Spent a summer out here as part of a conservation program. I was assigned as her guide." Cole stared at the coals. "She never mentioned you." Marshall smiled softly. She rarely mentioned herself, but she loved the forest, the silence, said it taught her how to listen without needing to fix everything. Cole's throat tightened. She was light. Marshall said, "Not loud, not blinding, but steady. Ivy has it too." But that light flickered for a while, until something wild came and reminded her it was still burning. Before Cole could speak, the door creaked. Ivy stood in the doorway, boots laced, scarf wrapped, sketchbook under her arm. "Can we walk the ridge trail today?" she asked, glancing between them. Just me and Marshall. Cole hesitated. "It's been foggy in the afternoons. Stay close, please." Ivy nodded. "I will." They set off together, Ivy's small frame skipping beside Marshall's steady gait. Cole watched until they vanished behind the pines, then headed in the opposite direction to check the area near Thunderstone Ridge, where another trap had been reported. But the fog came in faster than anyone expected. By noon, it blanketed the hills in a white so thick the trees faded into ghosts. Cole lost visibility fast, calling Ivy's name more than once, though he knew she wasn't there. Something in his chest clenched. Then the call came from Marshall's radio, static first, then his voice, shaken but composed. "I lost her." Cole didn't ask how. He only ran, through underbrush, over fallen logs, calling Ivy's name into the mist like a prayer. He found Marshall 10 minutes later at the edge of a broken deer path. "She was behind me 1 second, the old man said, voice taut. Then the fog took her. They split up, circling the hill, voices cutting through the silence, and then movement. Not from the trees, from the ground. Paw prints, large, fresh, deliberate. Cole followed them without hesitation, down the hill, across the creek, into a grove of bare birch trees where the fog began to lift. There, standing still as stone, was Ember. She didn't growl, didn't move, just turned her head slightly, and behind her, emerging from the mist, mud on her boots, cheeks red from cold, was Ivy. "Dad," she said, running to him. He dropped to his knees, arms around her. "She found me," Ivy whispered. Cole looked up. Ember stood barely 10 feet away. Rainwater dripped from her fur, her golden eyes glowing with something that wasn't wild, but knowing. Ivy broke free from her father's embrace and stepped forward slowly, eyes never leaving Ember's. And for the first time, Ember lowered her massive head. Ivy reached forward and touched her forehead gently to the tigress's. Neither flinched. Cole couldn't breathe. A heartbeat passed. Then Ember stepped back, turned, and vanished into the trees without a sound. It was the smell of smoke that reached Cole Dawson first, a faint, bitter ribbon in the wind, threading through the trees just after dawn. He stood outside the ranger station, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the sky darken not with clouds, but with something thicker, slower, more dangerous. Smoke didn't rise in the Smokies unless something had gone wrong. And something had, he radioed for backup. But static crackled back, the fire tower was too far, and the winds were already shifting. Cole moved quickly, grabbing his field pack, dousing his cabin's perimeter with water from the emergency tank, and calling for Ivy. She came immediately, already dressed and clutching her sketchbook. Her face was calm, but her eyes knew what was happening. She was 11 now, taller, sharper, still quiet, but not silent anymore. The fires in Hollow Creek, she asked. Too close to call, Cole said, ruffling her hair. We need to move. They didn't panic. They moved like the forest had taught them, aware, deliberate, fast without fear. Marshal Blake arrived at the station minutes later, wearing his old park-issued canvas coat and a wide-brimmed hat stained from years of storms. Lightning, last night, he said simply, split a dead oak clean down its spine. Marshal had aged since the last spring, but it suited him. The silver in his braid glinted like frost, and his shoulders still carried the dignity of someone who'd learned to listen before speaking. They drove through the back trail toward the origin of the smoke, reaching the low basin near Hollow Creek just as the flames came into view, low but fast, skimming the dry underbrush like tongues searching for breath. It wasn't a wildfire yet, but it could be. The wind was picking up. They started a perimeter, digging lines and clearing brush. Ivy stayed close to Marshall, helping carry water from the creek. Cole used his shovel to beat back embers that had begun to leap across the trail. Then he heard the cracking. A large pine, weakened by heat, gave way with a groan and in its fall. Struck a second tree that ignited on contact, too fast. Cole muttered, "We need to retreat." But the smoke turned, curling toward them like something alive. Marshall pushed Ivy back along the trail, but the fire had circled to their left, cutting off the path to the vehicle, then just beyond the ridge. A roar, not wind, not fire, a roar that split the trees, ancient and fierce. Cole turned just in time to see the unmistakable shape emerge through the haze. Ember, her coat was darker now, singed along the tips of her fur, her eyes locked on Cole. She didn't hesitate. She ran, straight through the fire line, through the shallow blaze, ignoring the flames licking her side, and came to a halt between them and the burning trail. Then she turned and ran, not into the fire, but around it, pausing just long enough to look back. "She wants us to follow," Ivy said. They did. Ember weaved through a narrow ravine Cole had forgotten existed, an old game trail, shaded by stone and fern, fireproof. They followed her breathlessly, ducking smoke, brushing ash from their faces. Ember led them until the smoke cleared behind them and the air cooled. Then she stopped. She stood at the top of a knoll, her chest rising with heavy breath, her paws singed but steady. She looked down at Ivy, who walked forward without fear. "Thank you," Ivy whispered, her voice like the first green leaf after snow. Ember didn't reply, not with a sound. She simply turned and walked away, back into the forest, back into the flame-shadowed mist. Cole watched her go, knowing it was goodbye. She had come back to save them one last time, and now she was returning to where she belonged. Weeks passed. The fire had been contained, thanks to a shift in wind and the speed of the Rangers' response. No homes were lost, no lives either, except that Ember was not seen again, not directly, but her prints appeared, lightly etched, at the edge of the ranger station road every morning, sometimes beside the creek, sometimes beneath Ivy's favorite tree, never close enough to startle, just close enough. And Ivy, now growing into a voice she had long forgotten, began to tell stories. She stood before groups of children at the visitor center, her journal in hand, reading from pages filled with drawings and quiet wonder. She became known as the forest's storyteller. The girl who once would not speak now shared tales of the tiger who healed her. She wasn't just an animal, Ivy would say, eyes soft and certain. She was the quiet that listens, the fire that protects. She was hope, one boy asked once. Is she still out there? Ivy smiled. She never really left. Marshall and Cole, meanwhile, began building something more permanent out of an old ranger outpost nestled in a quiet glen. They called it Wild Spirit Camp, a sanctuary for children like Ivy once was, those scarred not in body, but in soul. Children came from Knoxville, Chattanooga, even as far as North Carolina. They learned to walk in silence, to draw what they felt, to sit with their fear and let the wind speak through it. Cole taught them how to read the land. Marshall taught them how to trust it, and always. Ivy taught them how to hope. At night, around the campfire, they would share stories. And sometimes, when the fire burned low and the woods grew quiet, there would be a sound, a soft rustle, the snap of a branch, and in the morning, prints on the path, as if the forest itself had come to listen, as if Ember still watched, not as a tiger, but as a whisper in the wild. Sometimes, God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes, He sends them with stripes, with silent paws and ember eyes that remind us that even in the wildest corners of the world, love finds a way to speak. This story of Ember, Ivy, and Cole is not just about survival, it's about healing, about the quiet miracles that walk beside us, unseen, until the moment we need them most. Maybe you've felt lost in the fog like Ivy, or burdened by responsibility like Cole. Maybe, like Marshall, you've carried stories no one believed until someone came along who needed to hear them. And maybe, just maybe, your Ember is out there too, watching, waiting, reminding you that no matter how dark the forest gets, God is still near in the everyday chaos of life. We often forget to stop and listen, to trust, to hope. This story is your reminder. Even the fiercest fire cannot burn away the plans God has for your heart. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a quiet miracle. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part moved you the most. Or simply write Amen to let the world know you still believe in second chances, in healing, and in the wonders only God can weave. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss another story that lifts your spirit. And may God bless every step you take, even the silent ones. Amen.